The mahogany door of 1247 Willowbrook Lane exploded inward with such force that the brass hinges screamed in protest. Karen Pemberton stood in the doorway, her perfectly styled blonde bob disheveled, clutching a stack of violation notices like weapons of war. Her face was crimson, matching the lipstick that had somehow migrated to her left cheek during her assault on the door. "Danielle Martinez," she shrieked, her voice cracking on the second syllable. "You think you can ignore 17 hellway violations and just pretend I don't exist?" Daniel appeared from his kitchen, coffee mug in hand, staring at his destroyed front door with the same expression one might reserve for witnessing spontaneous combustion. "Karen, what the hell? Don't you Karen me?" She stomped into his foyer, her sensible beige flats leaving muddy prints on his hardwood floors. "Your grass is 3/4 of an inch over regulation height. Your mailbox is painted the wrong shade of forest green. It's clearly hunter green, which is not approved. And don't even get me started on that abomination you call a garden gnome." Daniel blinked slowly. "You broke down my door because of a garden gnome?" Karen's eye twitched. For 3 years, she'd served as president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association with military precision. She'd memorized every subsection of the 847-page covenant document. She'd attended city council meetings, fought for property values, and maintained their neighborhood's reputation as the most pristine community in the Tri-County area. But Danielle Martinez, this rebel, had pushed her past her breaking point. "That gnome," she said, pointing a manicured finger toward his front yard, "is wearing a Hawaiian shirt and sunglasses." Section 14.7 clearly states that decorative lawn ornaments must maintain dignified traditional appearances. "Your gnome looks like he's on vacation from a Jimmy Buffett concert." "His name is Gary," Daniel said calmly, "and he's staying." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her hand clutching her pearl necklace, the same pearls her grandmother had worn while serving as president of the Ladies' Garden Club for 32 consecutive years. This wasn't just about grass heights or mailbox colors anymore. This was about order, respect, and the very fabric of civilized society. "You've declared war," she whispered, her voice taking on an ominous quality that made Daniel's coffee mug pause halfway to his lips. "You have no idea what you've done, Mr. Martinez." She turned on her heel, marching toward the gaping hole where his front door used to be. "You have 48 hours to comply with all violations, or I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting. And trust me, when I'm finished with you, you'll wish you'd never heard of Willowbrook Estates." As Karen disappeared into the morning sunlight, Daniel looked down at Gary the garden gnome, who seemed to be grinning wider than usual. "Well, Gary," he muttered, "I think we're in trouble." Karen's war room was her dining room table, covered with architectural blueprints, city ordinances, and a laminated copy of the HOA covenant that she'd highlighted in 17 different colors. She'd spent the last 24 hours preparing for Daniel's inevitable surrender, but instead of compliance, she'd received something far worse: mockery. Gary the garden gnome now had company. 3 new gnomes had appeared overnight, each one more offensive than the last. There was Gladys in a polka-dot bikini, holding a tiny margarita. Fernando sported a sombrero and what appeared to be miniature maracas. The newest addition, which Karen had discovered during her 6 a.m. patrol, was wearing a t-shirt that read HOA. More like H no way. "That's it," Karen muttered, speed dialing her emergency contact list. "Emergency board meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. sharp." The Willowbrook Estates Community Center hadn't seen this kind of turnout since the Great Sprinkler System controversy of 2019. Residents packed the folding chairs, whispering among themselves as Karen stood at the podium, her presentation slides projected behind her with military precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly, "we face an unprecedented threat to our community standards. Daniel Martinez has not only refused to comply with clearly stated regulations, but he has escalated his defiance to levels that can only be described as anarchistic. A collective gasp rose from the audience as Karen clicked to her first slide, a close-up photo of Gary wearing his Hawaiian shirt and sunglasses. "This," she declared, "is just the beginning." The next slides showed the growing gnome army, each image more damning than the last. But as Karen clicked through her evidence, she noticed something troubling. People were smiling. Mrs. Henderson in the third row was actually chuckling. Even board member Robert Stansfield was fighting back a grin. "I fail to see what's amusing about the systematic destruction of our property values," Karen snapped, her composure cracking. That's when Daniel Martinez walked through the community center doors, followed by what appeared to be half the neighborhood. In his arms, he carried a petition. "Sorry I'm late," he said cheerfully, approaching the podium. "Karen, I believe this belongs to you." The petition contained 47 signatures, nearly half the community, requesting that Section 14.7 of the HOA Covenant be amended to allow creative and whimsical lawn decorations that bring joy to the neighborhood. Karen stared at the document, her world tilting on its axis. This is mutiny. This is democracy," Daniel replied gently. "And community spirit. Your gnome photos have been circulating on the neighborhood Facebook group. Turns out, people like Gary and his friends. They're planning to add some personality to their own yards." The room erupted in applause and laughter. Karen felt the walls closing in, her carefully constructed world of order and control crumbling around her. She'd dedicated her life to protecting this community, and now they were celebrating its destruction. "The meeting is adjourned," she whispered, gathering her materials with shaking hands. As residents filed out, chattering excitedly about their own gnome shopping plans, Karen stood alone at the podium. For the first time in 3 years, she felt utterly powerless. But as she watched Daniel shake hands and accept congratulations, something darker began brewing in her chest. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. 3 weeks later, Karen sat in her pristine living room, surrounded by legal documents and architectural surveys. If the community wanted to abandon civility, she'd show them what real warfare looked like. Her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. "City building inspection scheduled for tomorrow, 9 a.m. Every property on Willowbrook Lane." Karen smiled for the first time in weeks. While the neighbors had been busy playing with their garden gnomes, she'd been conducting her own investigation. Daniel's shed was 6 inches too close to his property line. The Hendersons' deck extension lacked proper permits. The Johnsons' fence exceeded height regulations by 4 inches. If they wanted to play games with HOA rules, she'd introduce them to city ordinances. The doorbell chimed, and Karen opened it to find Daniel Martinez standing on her porch, hat in hand. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by something approaching humility. "Karen, we need to talk." "Unless you're here to surrender," she said coldly, "we have nothing to discuss. Please." His voice was soft, almost pleading. 5 minutes. Against her better judgment, Karen stepped aside. Daniel entered her immaculate home, his eyes taking in the perfectly arranged furniture, the sputtered surfaces, the framed certificates of appreciation from various civic organizations. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about property values and community standards. And you're right about some things." Karen's eyebrows rose. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected. "The truth is," Daniel continued, "I moved here after my divorce because I needed stability, order, and you provided that. The neighborhood runs like clockwork because of you. I guess I needed something to push against, something to prove I still had some control over my own life." For a moment, Karen's armor cracked. She recognized something familiar in his words, the desperate need for control, for purpose, for mattering. "That doesn't excuse your behavior," she said, but her voice lacked its usual venom. Daniel nodded. "You're right. But Karen, calling building inspections on everyone, that's not going to restore order. That's going to destroy the community you've worked so hard to build." Karen felt the weight of his words. She thought of Mrs. Henderson, who'd lived in her house for 30 years, of the young family with 3 kids who'd just moved in last month, of the elderly Mr. Peterson, who could barely afford his property taxes as it was. Karen's voice broke slightly. "I just wanted people to care. about standards, about doing things right. They do care, Daniel said gently. They care about you, even if they don't always show it. Why do you think 47 people signed that petition? They weren't trying to hurt you, Karen. They were trying to find a middle ground. Karen sank into her favorite chair, suddenly feeling exhausted. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. Daniel smiled. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we just need to figure out how to make room for both of us. The next morning, Karen made 2 phone calls. The first was to her lawyer, canceling the building inspections. The second was to Daniel. Section 14.7, she said when he answered. I'm willing to propose an amendment. Decorative lawn ornaments are permitted, provided they're tasteful and well-maintained, and Gary can keep his Hawaiian shirt. What about Fernando and his maracas? Karen paused, considering. We might need to discuss appropriate noise levels. Daniel's laughter echoed through the phone. Deal. But Karen? Next time you want to negotiate, maybe try knocking first. Karen looked at her front door, still bearing scuff marks from her forced entry into Daniel's house. I'll consider it. As she hung up the phone, Karen noticed something outside her window. A small garden gnome sat on her doorstep, wearing a tiny business suit and holding a miniature clipboard. A note was attached. Thanks for keeping our neighborhood running smoothly, Gary and the gang. Despite herself, Karen smiled. Maybe there was room for both order and whimsy in Willowbrook Estates after all. But as she picked up the gnome, she couldn't shake the feeling that her battles with Daniel Martinez were far from over. The next time they clashed, she'd be ready, and she definitely wouldn't be knocking first.